What if I told you there was a full frame camera that shot 6K Blackmagic RAW, ProRes RAW, ProRes H.264, and H.265 in a form factor that was half the size of a red Komodo or pretty much any other cinema camera on the market? And what if that camera was also under $4,000? So before we get into what I love and what I don't love about this camera, the best thing I can do is just show you what this camera is capable of. So here's a short film that I made with this camera, as well as a couple little commercial pieces that I shot for one of my restaurant clients. So here's a quick reel of what this camera is capable of, and then we'll talk about its features, its quirks, the good, the bad, the ugly, all that camera review nonsense. But you know, this is all you want to see. Go for it. Watch it. Here you go. So the first thing I can say about what I love with this camera is the image quality, but I'm not surprised that I love the image quality because I love my Lumix S5, and we're using the same sensor here along the S1, the S1H, and the S5 now in this small little tiny cube form factor. If you guys remember, we did a review of the BG-H1 when that came out about a year ago, and I praised a lot of that camera. I think maybe its only fault is that it was micro four thirds, and as we all sort of move into Super 35 and full frame, as lenses get smaller, and of course as the bodies get smaller, full frame is becoming a much more attractive option even to micro four thirds shooters. And case in point, the BS1H is the exact same size as the BG-H1. I actually used a cage for the BG-H1 on the BS1H. They're identical. This camera is absolutely tiny. And I think that's why I'm actually more excited about what this camera says about the industry than the camera itself. I, in general, think we've plateaued with cameras across the map in terms of image quality and also even dynamic range. What it's really gonna come down to for everybody now is form factor and, you know, niche features here and there that you specifically need. But what I love about the BS1H is it seems like a prototype for what the future holds for full frame cinema cameras. The fact that these cube cameras even exist from Panasonic is cool. Like, they're really creating an ecosystem of cameras for everybody, from the VariCam to the EVA to the S1H to the even down to the S5. This little box camera is a camera that you can throw up for live streaming. It's a camera that you can throw as a crash cam, but it's also a camera that you can rig like a cinema camera, which is how I used it. But this is where the convenience of a cube can also become cumbersome. I actually don't think I'm the target audience for this camera. Someone who wants to use it as a run and gun handheld rigged camera, I don't really think that's what this camera is for. I do think a lot of people are going to use it this way because we all love to hack cameras and use them outside of their designated use case scenario, because that's just the nature of being a filmmaker. We're trying to think outside the box, no pun intended. But what you'll find is when you rig this camera up, even though the configurations are possibly endless, there's small things that start to compound into a bigger issue. The main one being that the fact that this camera does not have its own dedicated screen. Now, on surface level, this might not seem like a big deal, but if you've ever used a red Komodo, you know that that little monitor on there is kind of a game changer. That screen becomes so key because we're not always connected to a monitor. You might be prepping the camera and getting it set up, ready to shoot, and then you might put it into your rig that has the monitor. But the fact that this does not have a screen means you're either gonna have to use a Lumix Tether app with your phone, which I'm just not a fan of. I don't like having to use my cell phone to use a camera, or you're gonna have to connect it to an external monitor. Now, this is fine for most people. I think a lot of people are gonna be fine having to use an external monitor. I use the Blackmagic 12G SDI monitor over HDMI, and it looks great. Everything was wonderful, but I'm just really not a huge fan of having to go through the menus on the camera through an external monitor. And that really becomes apparent when you want to shoot RAW, which it's awesome that this camera can shoot Blackmagic RAW with a Blackmagic recorder or ProRes RAW with an Atomos recorder. But once you're in that RAW format, you lose your menu. So you have to send the clean feed to get RAW video. Now, you could set up a second monitor over SDI and get your menu and stuff on the SDI, and the RAW is going to the recorder, but then you're looking at two monitors, and that whole thing to me is very cumbersome for a rigged setup. It would be fine in a studio. I love that you can shoot Blackmagic RAW. I love that you can shoot ProRes RAW. I love all the internal codecs. I love that it's full frame. I love the size of it. I love how easy it is to rig and add accessories. Add in the fact that you can also use the XLR module from Panasonic, and it turns this thing into like an FX6 or an FX3. The possibilities are quite endless with this camera if you can look past some of those little mini hurdles. But then that also raises the question then, so who specifically is this camera for? And I really think it's just for someone who's already in the Panasonic ecosystem of cameras. Whether you have the S1H, the S5, the S1, a VariCam, or the EVA 1 even, I think this is that camera you toss in as that crash cam, that B cam. It's great for TV if you just need different angles, multicam setups, concerts, events, you know, all that kind of stuff, symphonies and orchestras. That is where this camera is really, really gonna shine, and it does exactly what it's designed to do in those situations. But if you're like me and you like to hack things and kind of work around stuff, you could end up with a wonderful red Komodo killer of a camera for a fraction of the price, and honestly a lot more features than even the Komodo can offer. Now, Panasonic also lent me the 35mm F1.8, which I used a lot in the commercial stuff that I had showed you. This is another wonderful prime lens that they've come out under the S line from Lumix. We have done the 24mm before. I've also played with the 85 and the 50. I think the 35 is definitely my favorite focal length in this new prime setup, and I think this actually completes the setup now too. We got 24, 35, 50, and 85 at relatively affordable prices for what they offer too, considering their F1.8 for full frame, super compact, super small. The focus feels awesome on them. I think they're a really good size for what they do. And, you know, look, I do love a prime lens, and 35mm is, you know, a universally loved focal length, and it just looks so good on a full frame camera. So this new 35mm F1.8 is A+ in my books. I'm definitely going to pick up one of these lenses for my Lumix S5. And speaking of the Lumix S5, does the BS1H replace my Lumix S5? No. Could it at some point? Yes. It is the camera that I want on paper, but in practice, it's just still not quite there. There's really only two things stopping me from switching from my S5 to the Lumix BS1H. It's one is IBIS. There's no IBIS on the BS1H, and the other is the fact that it doesn't have its own screen. I'm okay rigging up a camera all the time, but there are a lot of times where I don't want to rig up the camera. And I even found when I was doing some commercial work recently that I kept grabbing the Lumix S5 just because it's so convenient. You have that monitor there. It's nice and small. It feels good in the hand. I don't always need a cube. There's nothing particularly wrong with mirrorless hybrid style cameras, even if you're using them for professional work. So that's just a bigger conversation that I don't really want to have in this video. But if you're someone who needs that cube look, if you need that like cinema camera for client optics and all that kind of stuff, but you want to stay in the Lumix S1, S1H kind of ecosystem of full frame, this is a very attractive option, especially for the price. If you can look past those quirks, it's A+. I really, really do love this camera a lot. And I think maybe if I even spent more time with it, I get more accustomed to the idea of using that external monitor and how to get around the quirks of the menu system and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I'm always just more excited that these types of cameras exist and that Panasonic is offering such a variety of form factors within their lineup, so that us as creators, we just kind of sit back and say, do I need this, do I need that, or do I need this, or do I need that? And you pick the perfect camera for you within that lineup. Now, to wrap up this video, I actually want to rant a little bit because I think this might be one of my last camera reviews on this channel. And the reason for that is not because I'm not interested in cameras. Of course I'm interested in cameras. I'm gonna keep buying new cameras left, right, and center. I know that about myself. But the reason I don't like talking about them so much is I think we've hit a plateau in terms of what the camera offers you as a creative tool. It used to be that cameras actually made you better in a way because the image quality was so monumentally better than the previous models of cameras that were out before. But now it's like every new camera looks good. Everything from Fuji, Panasonic, Sony, Canon, Nikon, all of them, they just look so damn good that it's really hard for me to sit here and say, you need this new camera. And I'm just not someone who wants to sit and talk about all the specs and bit rates and codecs and all that kind of stuff when it comes to cameras. I just want to show you what cameras can do. And if I just want to show you what cameras can do, it doesn't actually matter what camera I'm using. So that is why I'm not sure I'll be doing much more camera related content on this channel. Of course, if something comes out and I'm excited about it and I'm interested in it, or if something happens and I learn a new tool or a technique that I really want to share with you guys, 100%. I will, but I just don't want to feed into this like shopping channel mantra of a lot of filmmaking channels now where it's like, here's the latest lens, here's the latest camera, here's the new this, here's the new that. It's just not my ethos anymore, and it's not something I just want to be a part of within that conversation. That whole hype culture of cameras, to me, it just, I don't know, I just don't feel it. I'm not feeling the vibes of that industry as much as I was before. But at the same time, I still want to be a resource for a lot of you. If you're going to buy something, I don't want you to waste money on something you possibly don't need. So as things come out and this stuff is released, I will just gauge the conversation. And if I want to pipe in and, you know, have a rant, I will, but I just want to say that that's my kind of take on cameras as a whole right now, and it's probably why you won't see too much camera content moving forward. It all comes down to you and what you know how to do, so learn how to do things. Don't buy things and spend things thinking it's going to make you a better filmmaker or photographer, because it won't. It seriously won't. I have so many cameras and I still suck at so much stuff with them. But I guess that brings us to outro time, and this time I'm going to give you a food recommendation. Have you ever heard of a Komodo? So this is a Komodo. I'm gonna take one out of this box right here. Right here in my hand, I've got a nice, beautiful Komodo. So terrible name, like for very obvious reasons. You can get these at Costco, you can get them at your major grocery stores. I don't know if this is a Canada only thing. Good question, you might know, I don't know. So if you can find them in States, go for it. Essentially, they are like mid-ripened tomatoes. It's like right before they go super red, they are this like weird brown color. This is the best tasting tomato you will ever have in your entire life. Like legitimately delicious. It tastes like when my nonna used to actually grow tomatoes in the backyard, because the stuff you get at the grocery store, get out of here with that crap. This is the best tomato you'll ever have. It's called a Komodo, not sponsored. I found these at Costco and I've been just enjoying them. I put them on sandwiches. I just eat them like fruit sometimes. Didn't even wash this thing. Shouldn't have done that. Gonna get 16 diseases. Too late now, I'm gonna eat it. Anyways, that's the Komodo. It's delicious. It's so good. It's delicious. My name is Patrick Damaso. Hope you like this video. Questions about the Komodo, BS1H, anything at all, let me know and we'll have a conversation about it. But otherwise, peace out.